and we will do a brief. That's interesting. I clicked the right screen. Can you guys see it? Okay. You guys can see the presentation? Okay. Okay, I was having a weird, like, it wasn't going when I said click on this screen, but I found it. So this is for all those who are entering this space, this is a workshop put on by Cooperation Humboldt and in partnership with American Red Cross. We chose to do this for the first time with HUUF. They've been, very responsive, and we've gotten a lot of support from Amy and Scarlett to record and put these on YouTube and on their website. So thank you so much for doing that. Like we've been able, Aya will testament that she actually looked at those videos and was able to, gain some more information on what we're doing on the ground here. This is week 6, and this week is dedicated to HUUF. Like the design of this week's presentation was supposed to be to take what we learned about HUUF within weeks 1 and 5 and implement it into week 6 so that we can get some momentum and expand on some of the ideas that have already been surfaced. So without further ado, we will go on our way. So we're going to do a brief overview of weeks 1 through 5, just because not everyone was able to attend at all moments. I've definitely learned a lot in the process in doing this. So again, I'm still very appreciative for the space that we've been given, and we're hoping to grow and create moving forward as the whole purpose of week 6. So we'll do a quick overview. So week 1, we went over practical community resilience. And so we learned about what it means to absorb the shock of disaster, right? And we talked about how that's more than just preparedness, but it's actually like post-response, like what happens, like, because people are going to respond to a disaster, things are going to happen. So what does community resilience look like, right? And so then we talked about, so after you learned a whole bunch, like Sabrina and I, we did the COVID response because we were in the right place. And now we're integrating those lessons into what we're doing next. So every time you have an opportunity to acknowledge and be familiar with people's response, there's learning lessons, there's relationships to build, there's bridges to form. And that was the kind of like what community resilience brought us, right? We're transforming to meet the challenges of the future. We're not staying place, we're not going back to normal. Week 2 is basically a way for us to incorporate Red Cross Ready Rating program, which helps determine how prepared an organization or a neighborhood pod or assembly, whatever it may be, how prepared they are. And so we did a presentation to kind of identify the tools and to the tools that help address people's preparedness level and identify strengths and weaknesses within an organization. Because you want to not just lean on your guns, as they say, but you want to acknowledge the missing gaps, the things that are not functioning, the things that are not operational in a time of disaster response. In week 3, we talked about becoming a resilient hub, right? We're kind of leading into that conversation. What is community resilience? Why is it important? What does it mean to be resilient, like being prepared, right? Through the Red Cross Ready Rating program. And becoming a resilient hub really talked about resources. Like what do we have right now readily available? What is neighboring? What is in proximity? And then exchanging information to make sure that you know what your inner circle knows and that those outer circles know what your inner circle knows, right? So being transparent, having open communication really helps you kind of identify those key players or potential collaborators. Another thing to mention is just, you are doing it for the sake of building community. It's not just to save a certain group of people that you have dear in your heart. You're there to be a resilient hub for the community around you. Each institution, each organization knows this, wherever you are planted, you kind of are growing your seeds from there. You're planting seeds from there, and they're spreading out to neighboring lawns. And so you need to extend a hand out and understand what's around. I feel like another part to mention about resilient hubs was this part about like like it's not like a seasonal thing. It's a year-round experience, right? Like maybe in the winter, you start acknowledging that you guys have a lot of rainfall. So that would be in the season before that, you would want to start planning around that. And so like a resilient hub is not just like, oh, when disaster comes around fire season, it's let's get prepared for all these things and like make sure that we're ready and acknowledging the things that are absent, the things that we're good at, and kind of like leaning on a resilient hub for the overall purpose of just disaster response and being a resilient community as a whole. Week 4, so basics of community organizing. And after this slide, we're going to get more discussion based. We're going to really get into the nooks of cranny of what we've been talking about. And so we'll have some space for all of us to get there. And again, if you guys have any questions or any immediate responses, please feel free to put them in the chat. Sabrina will then, make a cue or interrupt me, or we'll make sure to answer your questions. So basics of community organizing, week 4. We talked about community organizing is a process where people who live in proximity to each other come together into an organization that acts as their shared, acts in their shared self-interest. And so again, identifying, your neighbors, identifying people who are around you, making sure that you're not just looking in for your own self-interest, but the self-interest of your community and the people who want to be collaborators in the process. Then week 5, which we did just last week, we talked about neighborhood mapping and assessing needs. We, showcase some resources that we've been exposed to through not only Transition US, but the more focused NorCal Resiliency Network, network out there. And we talked about, shared goals and values, creating micro communities that help to meet their collective needs. And it's very similar when it's all written out, but there's different stages to this, right? There's the organizing, there's the planning, then there's the implementation, there's the collaboration. So, it all seems similar because you're doing the same type of work, just with different sectors of the community, your immediate community, your neighboring community, the state, the local governments. And so, there's definitely a lot of redundancy in disaster response, but that's by design, and that's intentional so that we make sure we nail the immediate things that are needed, that we do need to focus on and pay that much attention to. And so those were weeks 1 through 5. What we're going to do next is we're going to do a collaborative workspace. We're transitioning from this presentation to a collaborative workspace. We're entering it. So what we're going to first do is go over the meeting ground rules. We're going to address participatory leadership and what that means and what it looks like. We're going to talk about coming to a consensus for our direction, because we are now a democratic-based, sociocratic, group who is going to operate based on everyone's opinions and kind of like make sure that every voice is equal. And we'll get into that in the meeting ground rules. We're going to land an action item or multiple, right? We're going to decide, okay, this is what we're going to do. If the action item is just, okay, we're going to meet, that's an action item. Like we already landed something, right? We're going to start small, medium, or large, wherever our group decides, and we're going to take it from there. And again, yeah, we're going to land a following meeting time. That's what we're going to do at the end of the meeting today. So here are the ground rules. Cooperation Humboldt adds these ground rules before anything we do with members of the community so that we understand that we're all coming from an authentic place. So I'll go over them quickly because a lot of them are self-explanatory. So show up on time and come prepared. Thank you all for doing that today. Like you guys are all here today. You guys know it's the last one. I'm sensing some energy, so I appreciate that. Stay mentally and physically present. So if you can, of course, there are situations where you have to go see who's knocking at the door at a random time you're not expecting, or you have to step aside because your fire alarm went on. Like, of course, like there's exceptions, but for the most part, stay mentally and physically present. Mutual support and mutual accountability. So we all make mistakes. We're not like these demigods trying to like community organize and like bypass all the trials and tribulations. Like there are obstacles, there are ways to get knocked down, but there are better ways to get back up. So being able to say, hey, I missed this deadline. Hey, I was unable to get in contact with this person, and that was the thing I said I was going to do. Like, just say so. Just say like, hey, I'm having challenges. I'm having difficulty. I'm having a hard time understanding why we're doing this thing this way. Like that's up to you to be accountable to the group to say, hey, I don't want to just group think this through and say, oh yeah, I agree. Oh yeah, I agree. And like join the bandwagon. I want to say, I actually have a distinct difference of opinion here that I think is important for X, Y, and Z reasons. So I think that's a really, I think 3 is one of the most important things, because otherwise you're just in a group to be in a group and you might just go along with whatever. And that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to form actual like distributed leadership. And I'll mention this here now because distributed leadership is when someone has the energy, the juice, the desire, they are given the position to speak, and then we can then respond as a team and take that lead if the team agrees that that's a direction that they want to go into. So if you have the energy, if you have the direction, if you have the background experience or the skill set, please, like that's your role. It's your right and your responsibility to just be able to, showcase that to the group. Move up, move back. So there's a couple different ways people express this. And so I'm speaking a whole bunch right now. And so in the next few moments, I'm going to step back so that other people can take up the space and share their ideas and comment on the material that we're here discussing today. And that's an example. Listening with an open mind. So we all come from different backgrounds. And so we're all going to have different angles on things that we're going to be listening to. But the point here is to listen to get smarter, not to just be overcritical and to reject people's realities, because we don't want to do that. We want to accept people's realities and then come to an understanding of why those realities make more sense given a certain scenario or whatever it may be. So stay open to new ways of doing things, use active listening, avoid assumptions, and ask clarifying questions. Like especially the avoiding assumptions and asking clarifying questions, this is a safe space to do so. So, just make that like a consideration. Oops, didn't mean to go back. Okay, so WAIT is an acronym. So it's like, why am I talking? So why am I talking is like seek first to understand, like make sure you know what you're stepping into, then to be understood. So then you can be like, okay, now I have an opinion on this. Can someone like respond or reflect on this and tell me if it makes sense or not? And stay on point. So try to land the plane. If you have a point that's important, try to think about, okay, there's a story connected to this. Is this anecdote going to throw us off the agenda? Maybe bring in the anecdote later when it's like a time to socialize, a discussion-based thing, but stick to the point. Make sure you're not like diverging the group conversation. The 7th one is attack the problem, not the person. And I think this one is overlooked too often because people, again, we make mistakes. We need to unlearn things that we were just taught in life. Like we do not assume to know everything, but in our minds, people have like the sense that they are correct because that's the reality. So attack the problem, not the person. And I've seen this go both ways. I've seen this epically fail, and I've seen this very much turn an argument into a really elaborative and rejuvenating conversation. So there's power in being able to acknowledge that someone may be wrong in your sense of interpreting, but they're right in some way, and to understand that gives everyone clarity. Children are welcome, and also pets are welcome too. So we all have families, and don't ever feel like you have to close yourself in a room. And like if you have a visiting cousin, your visiting cousin can sit in or whatever. Like we want to be inclusive. You do not have to feel like you're in an office space trying to be formal, because we are people. This is interpersonal work. So children are welcome. And expect unfinished business. Like if we don't get through everything, it's okay. If not everyone agrees on something, maybe it's not the time to land on that one thing. Let's set it aside. Let's think about it. Next week's meeting, let's try and see if we are ready then. If it's not ready then the next one. And we'll have to just be patient because this work takes patience. And those were the ground rules. Moving along to discussion. Anything from the course you want to bring up, or anything that we went over in weeks 1 through 5 that maybe you thought was interesting, you thought sparked some ideas in you? This space is for everyone. Just this first question, anything from the course you want to recall? Just some thinking room for everyone.
I definitely, I'll share something that kind of popped out for me during this, during some of these courses. At one point, we were talking about, I don't know, we were just talking about envisioning different ways to make HUUF more environmentally friendly at one point, and I just had this great idea of reaching out to the engineering department at HSU and asking them that once COVID stuff is all, hopefully safer, asking their department to come and build us a rainwater catchment system because they have the knowledge and the know-how, and they have people that need projects in our community. So I don't know. It was definitely just like a fun, just a little idea I had. So just thought I'd share it.
Yeah, I love that.
think it's a great idea. I support that.
Yeah.
Aya says in the chat that she wants to explore what we found out about the infrastructure of support that exists around you for fire,
for disaster prep.
and
Yeah.
who other service providers.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I guess like I'm not, I watched your training videos and that made me like, I haven't been able to interface with the fire department here. I think they're just busy and they won't return my phone calls. So, and I'm, by the way, I'm doing research on disaster prep and, COVID and environmental justice issues on behalf of the EPA and unpaid, but still doing it. And so I haven't been able to interface with the local government that's provides disaster prep services. So I'm wondering if you've had headway up there about what the resources are. And I watched your training and it gave me an overview of who the resources are for you. Like the Red Cross came to talk. Seemed like you had a relationship with the Office of Emergency Services. And any others that are kind of obvious players in the disaster prep arena that I should be thinking of as a resource aside from the nonprofits. I think I have a handle on the nonprofits.
yeah, so the two that come to mind are CERT. We are consistently over and over again referred to CERT, and the Redwood Tsunami Action Group, I believe they're called, or Redwood Tsunami Work Group, something like that. Is another one that I've been told to connect with, and we're right now in the process of connecting, making those relationships. Also, the Blue Lake Rancheria is a star in disaster response and resilience and being a resilient space.
Another one actually I forgot to mention is the office of the public health department of the state of California. I've actually spoken to 2 public health officials and I've been looking at their resources today. I'm a little unclear, but I'll put the link for their website in the.
Yeah, we're still kind of integrating ourselves as Cooperation Humboldt. I'm curious, is HUUF connected to any of those, any emergency services organizations in that way? Any relationships there?
Not to my knowledge.
Not that I know of. No.
Okay.
Yeah, Eve, I don't know if you can speak to that. Not that I know of.
I expect that Amy and Scarlett can probably speak to it much better than I can. They're a little more involved with, well, they are office staff or HUUF staff, so they are probably a little more in the know as far as that goes.
Okay.
So no, we know nothing.
Actually, well, that's what we're here for. So.
In terms of mental health resources, I'll put the Trauma Resource Center has been very generous in offering support. I think I told Oscar that they're, and maybe Sabrina, I told you too, that they're willing to come and do a seminar on mental health if you need. And they're also, if you need referrals to mental health services, that might be they will be able to help.
Gotcha.
I like how we talked about partnerships. That was something that everyone was kind of surfacing, partnerships with local entities, partnerships with the university for creative, like, project creation. And I like that because that is a very big part of this. That's a very, very prominent part of this. You can't reinvent the wheel because you're going to upset people who are doing a lot of really awesome, amazing work, who are then not getting recognized or not being seen or not being communicated with. And so keeping those channels of communications updated, present, and active is a huge thing in this. And we're actually going to get a little bit deeper into that when we talk about youth engagement, as well as inner resilience work.
Yeah, totally. I want to also mark the just play time check, and we have a lot of like more in-depth visioning after this, and so I want to maybe skip ahead a bit because we kind of spent a lot of time on the ground rules, and I want to get more into discussion.
Yeah, so we're going to move into these next parts of the discussion: visioning, how we can reach out to youth, what is in motion, what has been put on hold. We're going to talk about these things. So these are kind of rhetoricals, and we'll get to them in a little bit. So week 6, we're looking ahead, building momentum, right? So what is surface based on discussions with organizations? We already know that that's what we're going to focus on today. The active directory system and administration support has been something that's been mentioned a couple times from our HUUF presentations, and also the need for engagement with youth. So that's both an element of support and an element where there's needing of more work, project development, et cetera. And again, here, the big word, partnerships and collaboration. And we don't want to just like say this like, oh, you guys need these people to understand or to like do this with them. You don't need anyone. You guys could do everything amongst yourselves, right? At the end of the day, that's true. But what can happen when you reach out to people? You can feel inspiration. You can feel like creativity because you're sharing ideas based on things that are already happening. And so being aware and identifying these things early on can really help shape what you end up offering and creating for your own organization.
Does anyone here who's been maybe part of the previous conversations feel this is kind of like we like took what we gathered from our discussions as like the main areas that kind of we saw wanted to be addressed or like focused on of ways that y'all can develop? And so is there anything else that you feel like through this presentation has come up within yourself or within the organization that maybe could use some reevaluating or a new idea that came to mind? Kind of like Scarlett brought something forward that I thought was really cool. Yeah, I'm just curious, like after this presentation, like what has come up for all of you besides what we have listed here.
I know we talked a little bit about the idea of creating, a garden of some sort at HUUF, if we could, generate the interest, get enough people involved, and decide where the best space was to put it. And I'm still very, very interested in that. I think that's a great thing to pursue, especially as it gets closer and closer to planting season. And but I haven't really done anything to pursue that except for discussing it with you folks. And that's mainly because HUUF is not really open yet. I don't really know who I would take my idea before. Maybe Amy and Scarlett, have done something with that. I don't know. I am ready to participate. I'm ready to give a lot of good ideas. I'm ready to help organize, but I'm not sure when any of us are planning to get together to discuss any of the ideas that we come up with here.
Okay.
Do you, Scarlett, or?
Yeah, I can tackle that one if you want, Amy. We kind of are doing this thing with the with the RE program, because we want to build a new playscape, but we want it to be like an all natural playscape, and a garden is kind of embedded in that. And so we're still very much at the beginning stages of the whole planning and doing that. I believe her name is Laurel, is the woman who's like kind of in charge of most of the grounds work. But Eve, I'm sure we'd love to have you on our RE meetings when we do talk about playscapes.
Oh, I'd love to participate. Yes, just email me, let me know, I'll be there.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm already hearing like the rainwater catchment, the garden, and I'm guessing that both of those ideas might tie into this vision that you just kind of set, disclosed, Scarlett, about like this, the whole structure being in this way. So that's cool. That definitely is a big component of resilient hubs, is the actual infrastructure of the building. So that's an awesome advancement that y'all are considering.
Right. And so I'm seeing a lot of this engagement like work with youth and like kind of getting people in HUUF more involved, that can lead to these projects, right? So instead of thinking of just these isolated projects, I love how Scarlett is already connecting it to existing things that are happening, like ideas and visions that you guys have. And so, right, not just the project, but the vision, the reason why behind why we're doing it. So I appreciate that. And so the rest of and so that's one section. And then we're talking about partnerships, collaborations, inner resilience workshops, developing and contributing to the curriculum, and seeking partnerships within fellowship community. So again, this is already what we're talking about. So this is great. This means that our trajectory for today's week 6 is exactly on point with what you guys are wanting to talk about and ready to talk about. So some more like things that we've pulled from what we've already learned, and some things that I thought I wanted to resurface again before we get into a visioning process, which right after this slide, I believe we're going to do an actual visioning. And so youth that have already been exposed to UU concepts, I think Scarlett mentioned this in an email, that some people have just grown up in it. You know, they just were kind of just in the environment, right? And so these individuals, they shouldn't be forgotten because they already are in here. But what is their role, right? Is it leadership based, or what are their desired focuses, right? Or their desires or their focuses. So basically, how well do we know these individuals? Because that would be a really good place for me to just me speaking, I'm thinking that like it would be a really awesome place to start, just to understand like, who do we have so far and why do we have them? Like, what are their reasonings for wanting to be part of HUUF on a deeper level? And again, leadership, are they ready to take on some roles of leadership? What does that look like? Can we talk about peer engagement? And because to me, if I was young, I would want someone my age to be like, hey, come check out this cool youth group program, instead of being told by an old white man, oh, go check out that program over there. I see kids like you running around, right? And so we want to make sure we are inviting and like thinking about, you know, how would people in their shoes feel? Challenges and engaging with youth. So these are just general challenges. You know, there's liabilities because, you know, they're minors. They're pursuing higher education conflicts. So we don't want to take them away from, you know, their education or like, you know, going to college or these pursuits, because, you know, for me personally, like I did all this work after college. And so for me, it felt like a good, like, stepping stone to the furtherment of my career. So someone might feel like they're not ready for this type of engagement. So framing that in a way that is that is inviting. And then stigma around religious groups, you know, so sometimes just knowing that fellowship translate to church, which is not true, right? They're separate concepts, but you know, someone might have a stigma around like just the concept of a religious group, and helping break that through engagement, through activity, through recreation, I think would be a really awesome way to do so. So that being said, Sabrina, do you want to give a brief rundown of this, like kind of this consideration?
Yeah, so one of the things that came to my mind of ways to, and again, we can get more into this discussion about how you actually do connect with the youth, because I'm curious, like, in fact, I'll raise that question right now. At the current moment, like, how does your agency or organization go about connecting with youth? How do youth find your organization? Like, how is that relationship established? and yeah,
So
and
right now, the youth are, it's mostly just like the kids that have grown up with UU. They're not really bringing their friends into the group. And it's definitely more towards like our engagement right now is like me doing Instagram live videos that they watch because nobody joins me on Zoom. So that's kind of our level of engagement right now. So I really want to offer it to teens in the broader community because it is, you know, they're learning about themselves in that time and they're trying to find their own spirituality and how to survive during the craziness that is teenagehood and high school. So I want to be able to offer that to them, but I just don't know how.
right, yeah, and I think a big part of that is like how do you get the message out of, you know, even if you prepare something, like how do you get that in the hands or in the eyes of the people that you're trying to engage with. And so one of the things that just came to mind, and again, we can have a deeper discussion about this, but is just like what local agencies are currently working with youth in our area and how can we connect with them and kind of make this, you know, how can we prepare something and then like connect with them and offer this for them to offer the youth. And for example, one specific example, this is the Oscar and I are on the we're a part of the behavioral health board committee for recovery and substance abuse, and they reached out to us with like a survey with like a bunch of questions that they were going to with transitional age range youth struggling with substance use disorder. And one of the questions was asking like, in your recovery, what's an element that has been supportive of you? And we suggested to them that they include like some type of spiritual component to that. And so youth who are then maybe who check that's something, an element that they would consider to be beneficial to their recovery. Like any youth that check that could maybe then get connected to y'all's organization and like through that develop some type of process. And that's just one example, but like tapping into these organizations and being like, hey, is there a space to raise this question of like, because exactly like what's being brought up here is that this element of like spirituality or like finding purpose through getting involved in the community, however you want to call that or make that look, it's something that is definitely a huge component to like one's well-being. And I think that a lot of youth might be looking for that without even really realizing that that's what they're looking for, maybe not having words to put to it, or maybe they do know that that's what they're looking for, but they don't know how to find that, or they don't feel like comfortable with the resources that are available. And so developing relationships with these organizations that are working so intimately with youth and finding ways to like to engage in that way. Does that make sense? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, or if you have any partnerships with.
I guess I'm just curious about more programs like, and I guess not necessarily how we go about communicating to them, but yeah, I guess that too is just how we go about those collaborations and pursuing those, because we don't really, to my knowledge, have any of those direct ties other than through UU programs for the youth.
Yeah.
So yeah, any
Yeah.
more local ones, I'm down to reach out and be like, hey guys.
Yeah, developing those relationships is important. And Aya makes a comment that that she's gotten headway talking about mental health with youth, and like she's made a presentation that like breaks it down in a way that's engaging and fun for them to understand. And one of the things that they really like learning about is like happy hormones and kind of talking about like your well-being and like breaking it down and with the hormones that are going on. And so there's different ways that you can kind of get to them. And I think that like if you have any youth within your organization who might be willing to like be part of this outreach, I think that that would be probably the best way to go about it, because youth reaching out to other youth is always really powerful. But yeah, there's definitely a way to like establish a plan of action for how to engage with these organizations, or how to actually initiate outreach, what to prepare to actually offer. That's definitely a conversation that you could like organize a meeting around and kind of like create a working group to develop this plan.
Amy, I want to invite you to maybe ask your question to Elizabeth.
Yeah, I know since I'm not on video, it's a little harder to, thank you, Oscar. Elizabeth, not to put you on the spot here, just
Sure.
I'm just curious about, since you have been a UU in other communities and are new to this one, what we're talking about right now as far as re-engaging with the youth in our local community, and how to do that is kind of almost just a little kind of a microcosm of a larger issue that we have kind of uncovered a little bit within this course, is that how to be a little bit isolated intentionally, but we just tend to kind of be off and doing our own little thing and not necessarily fully engaged with the community, not forming like really long-lasting partnerships necessarily with other community organizations. So I'm just curious what your experience has been in other fellowships or churches you've been a part of. What has that community collaboration looked like?
Well, so I'm definitely one of those folks that grew up in the church. I was at LRY, so a lot of us with the whole thing that kind of went down with the end of LRY and the way that it was perceived by other members, got really disenchanted with it. My disenchantment was definitely not as bad as other people's, but I also didn't feel a really strong pull to stay in the church. We were definitely those kind of borderline kids between, boomers and Generation X, who were left alone a lot to our own devices and created our own culture within that youth group. And then when all the adults realized we were doing all the things all the adults were doing and got upset about it, it felt very hypocritical. And I think a lot of us got very turned off to participating in any kind of organized religion. Even though, as I've gone through the decades, and I'm 58 now, I realize a lot of my values came from being raised UU. It's hard to say why, that was my experience and the experience of my peers. I'm not entirely sure how much of that would hold true for younger people today. The one thing that I see in general is just a real trend towards not being very comfortable with religion in an organized sense. I mean, I do run across a fair number of youth that have some connection to spirituality, but you're right in something that you said earlier. There's definitely some stigma around religion of any kind. I think that's probably related to the impact of very conservative religion, trying to sort of pigeonhole people, whereas most youth today are pretty diverse and they're growing up in a very diverse environment. And so I think that's not something they're very comfortable with. My own congregation was Monte Vista UU in Montclair down there in Southern California. And so there was a fair amount of ecumenical interfaith work that people were brought together to do. And I think that helped the community stay, somewhat healthy. My own memory is of being involved in activism pretty early. I think I went on my first march for hunger, I think when I was 12. So some of those things worked for me, but I'm not really sure what would work for younger people now. I'm a bit disconnected from that. I have no children of my own. Well, not entirely true, but she came to us as a young adult. So some of that stuff I missed. So yeah, I'm not sure I have a lot of really useful stuff, given that I haven't been heavily involved in a Unitarian community as an adult, at least not recently. Sorry, I'm not more help.
No, I appreciate your perspective. It's just always, because there's that saying, right? If you've seen one UU church, you've seen one UU church, right? I mean, because everybody in the
Very true.
organization has their own way of doing things and organizing. And so it's really lovely to hear other people's perspectives and experiences. Thank you.
Sure.
That was great. Yeah, I'm so glad that's recorded because that's a bit of history. And we're history in the making, right? So
Yeah.
I appreciate the insight, Elizabeth, and Amy. Thank you for asking that question. Genius.
Super.
See, participatory leadership, just like that. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna vision. So we're gonna get, Sabrina is off camera, but I'm assuming she's present for this. But we're basically just gonna go onto a visioning place. And the first thing we're gonna talk about is youth outreach and engagement. So the idea here is to talk about youth outreach and engagement in the past, what it looks like now, and what we want it to look like in the future. Because we're visioning. And there's no right or wrong answer to any of this. Even if you feel like you remember something wrong, just put it out there, because let's analyze it later, right? And then let's make sense of these thoughts. So Sabrina, so this is us talking about this. Everyone on this call, there's no exclusion here. Sabrina, if I remember correctly, you said you were comfortable making the actual stickies.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay,
Unless
cool.
you want to do it so people can see, like,
I mean,
if you do it, people can see you type it and stuff. But if I do it, it'll just pop up.
okay. Let's start with the past. You know, like we've already surfaced these things.
Depends on how far in the past you want to go.
Let's go as far as you can remember. That's a good.
Well, the past, LRY, there was a lot of social action momentum at the time, and there were people creating their own social climate forums and festivals and having their own meetings, and it was very independent. And the teens, from what I understand, were majorly in charge, and they might have had like a 20s coordinator or something, but it was very much their own. I don't know, Elizabeth could probably speak more to that part of it. But that's like past youth, UU. And then when I first came to HUUF like a year and a half ago, I want to say. And even then, I met the teens because they were volunteering or getting paid to do childcare for the RE, and very few of them would stick around for youth group after the service, to my knowledge. And yeah, I just know that in the past, I don't think teens were encompassed, and I feel like, I don't know, grouping teens is just kind of weird to me in a way too, of like having 14-year-olds with 18-year-olds when like it seems like you're at such a different point in your life at that time. But as adults, we just kind of think about it as numbers of like, ah, those are close enough, and not really taking the opportunity to like you were saying, you want somebody to reach out to you who's your same age, and you're intimidated if a senior walks in and you're a freshman and you're like, oh, they want me to go join them. I don't know about that. But you know, if you're a freshman and another freshman walks up to you and you're like, hey, come join, it's a lot more relatable. So yeah, I'm gonna stop talking now and see if anyone else has any ideas.
I'm gonna put that one in future. Getting peer-to-peer relationship engagement is kind of like a future vision, which I very much support and agree with, like for all the reasons that you mentioned.
Well, I know in the past, not our former RE director. And so when I say our RE director, that's kind of the person in charge of children and family programs and ministries, if you will. And so not our former one, the one before that, the woman who held the post for years and years and years, she had a close working relationship with the Child Development Lab and the Child Development Program at HSU. So she kept a close relationship. You know, we were always sourcing, you know, teachers for Sunday and things like that, like Scarlett mentioned. And there was is still a program in place where I don't know which majors it is, but for certain classes, there's a community service component, and we are one of the designated places where you can come do your internship / community service, whatever. I'm saying it wrong, but there is a program in place where we are one of the places students at HSU can choose to come put in some hours and get class credit. I haven't seen that program thriving during my time, but again, I haven't been around long enough to say what that was like before.
I will say I was a part
yeah.
of that program. That's the whole reason I came to UU,
Oh,
because I
really?
was a part of HSU and I was
Nice.
taking an eco-spirituality class, and they needed us to have 20 service learning hours. So I saw the HUUF needed people and nobody had signed up, and so me and like two other people from the class were with them, and that was about oh 2018 maybe. So yeah, like 3 years ago now. Time seems really weird because of the pandemic. So but that was the last time I saw it being really, it worked out well, and then like I got a job out of it being an RE teacher, and then from there I am now a teen director and the tech person. So like that program worked really well at one point.
Yeah, that's something that I mentioned in the chat earlier, was giving credit for getting involved in the work. I think that that's a really good incentive, and then once they kind of get a taste, they realize like, oh, I really enjoy this.
I have a question. When we're talking about youth, what age group, from what lowest age to what highest age are we really talking about?
That's a great question. What is the answer to that?
So for our youth at HUUF, I, as of this year, technically expanded it to include, or I guess I'm working to try and expand it to include 13 to 18. Because before it was just freshmen, and you had 13-year-olds who were in 8th grade hanging out with 4th graders in the RE room, and it was just not working.
Yeah.
So right now it's 13 to 18, and that might, what I really want to do is have like 7th and 8th graders, 9th and 10th graders, and then 11th and 12th graders. That's what I really want to do, but that's future stuff.
Yeah, I
Well,
remember.
and
Thank you for clarifying that. Basically, we can say teenagers, I guess, then.
Yeah, you call it youth.
Okay.
It doesn't really make you feel older though. Just saying, teens want to feel older. And
Young
really
adults.
make them feel older.
Young adults is the politically
But
correct.
then young adult, we also have a young adult engagement though, and that
Oh dear.
is for like 20 to 30.
Okay.
But
I remember.
Maybe we just need to rename.
I remember in my church when I was in a Catholic church, but they had a very active and strong youth component. It was very large, and there was like different age ranges had like different. I can't remember the names, but there was like, I just remember the last one was Sky, and that was like, you get like shirts, and everyone was so excited to like when you could finally like be a part of Sky, because they were like the oldest group, like the coolest group, you know. Maybe it was like Lights, you know, something. So I like that idea of like kind of breaking it up by groups and having the transition be like something that's like something to work towards and look forward to. Bye, Aya.
I also remember from my own experiences as a youth in LRY that functionally speaking, it actually included young adults, I'd say up to about 25, because they were the ones that most often volunteered to be, you know, kind of counselors and organizers for the events that we did to get together. And they would also both serve as role models of, okay, this is what it's like to be an adult. But in addition, because they're close enough in age, weren't terribly judgmental, which I think for us was really helpful. You know, I mean, it was like our times today, a time of tremendous social change and upheaval, and a lot of conflicting values, some of which were more conservative. And of course, as youth, we were more experimental, more liberal, and just a little more wild and crazy. So having people in their 20s who kind of understood and accepted that because they hadn't been there that long ago themselves, you know, made it work better. So even though they were in more roles of responsibility, they still had an influence, you know. So just a side note.
I have a quick off the topic question, I think, but what is LRY?
So Liberal Religious Youth was the church youth group that started at, seem to remember it was mid 60s to about early, I want to say early 80s, because I was kind of gone by then. And then that was taken over by YRUU. So, and there was a lot of controversy around both the existence of LRY and what it became and the disbanding of LRY, largely because 60s to the 70s, sex and drugs and rock and roll, we were not socially acceptable, but we were doing what a lot of adults were doing because that was the era we lived in. And it's a difficult chapter to talk about. I mean, if you talk to other LRYers, and there are some groups on Facebook, there's an LRY group on Facebook, there's still a lot of resentment over the way that it was taken apart.
A part of our history. Thank you.
Yeah. No, they thought we were out of control. They were probably right.
Yeah.
But frankly, so were adults, and youth our age generally tend to be anyhow. For us, it was a safe place to be together, where we could do all of those things and probably not die. To be perfectly honest, you know, I mean, anybody who lived through those times can tell you that living through those times is an accomplishment.
So
For what it's worth. Yeah.
What do y'all envision, like, so what do you envision the youth like doing in the future? Like, how are you presenting this opportunity to be a part of HUUF's youth program? Like, what does that look like for them in your ideal vision for the future?
In the ideal vision for the future, I see youth putting on services that can serve it at least, you know, once a month or, you know, every so often to share their perspective with the rest of their congregation. I would really love to have that, and I know everybody else would. You know, I would love to be able for them to have the financial backing and resources of HUUF to be able to have their own, if they needed to go on a youth retreat and have their time to be crazy if they need to be in a safe space. I want to encourage that to, you know, but so, you know, I want to see more responsibility on their part, and I want to see us taking care of them more. But in order for that to happen, we need them to tell us what they need, but they don't know what they want or need. And it's just a circle of.
Gotcha. Yeah, I feel like working with youth, I feel like it, like facilitating discussions to help them come to those conclusions. You know what I mean? Like, I just did a workshop on like really having services be youth led, like services as in like just all services provided, and like, but working with the youth to help them come to like the realizations, like as a leader, empowering them to be a leader and come to those realizations. And so I love that. I think that that's like a really good method.
I really am like the conversation about having role models, because that really stuck to me, because when I was a kid, I remember going into like, we had like red, yellow, and green doors for like the children. And then there would be this cool big room with a number 5 on it. And it was all the youth group kids, and they were like young adults, and they, you know, they were just cool in my eyes, right? And so I always wanted to graduate those other doors so I could get to the youth group, so I could hang out with the old cool kids. And it seems to me that perhaps there may have been a gap where young kids in UU over at HUUF, you know, they may have not seen older kids, you know, engaging and stuff. And so they grew up and their role models and their influencers came from other sources. social media, friends at school, other programs, etc., sports, right? And so I like this conversation about engaging youth now and like trying to get them incorporated now, but also thinking about creating that image, those role models, that those people to look up to, so that the younger UU children, you know, people below 13, younger than 13, like they have something to aspire to be. And so we're doing the legwork now early so that those younger children, when they do grow up, when they do have more deeper relationships and interests and community engagement or whatever it may be, they have that, like that model that, you know, there are older people doing cool stuff within UU, and like that can be me one day. So I just really like this vision because, again, not only does it speak to me, but it just seems like the right approach, you know, because we're not neglecting the groups, the younger kids who will eventually be 13 to 18, right? Long term. I really like this discussion, and there's a lot of great stuff on here, and I would like to continue our conversation on the other side. But Eve, you have a question?
I just wanted to say, part of the nuts and bolts of in the near future, when we're considering young adult, youth engaging in more services, you know, for the congregation and such. I think it's always really important not to, as we're presenting it, not to make, you know, anyone feel that we're overburdening, we're expecting too much, they have to do more than they really feel inspired to do to live up to what we're suggesting. And also at the same time, don't let them feel undervalued or not sufficiently respected. You know, that is, let them know that we want them to participate. We feel good about their participating, but yet at the same time, let them decide what they want to do. Let them decide how they want to organize it. Let them decide, you know, how often they want to do it, that sort of thing.
Right. And that comes with, you know, Scarlett's point of sometimes they don't know. They're just young kids. And so allowing them to have that sense of like, even being able to give them a space, you're right, Eve, to like express what they think they want, like to have a safe space to talk about those things is great. And it's a great way for them to feel safe and that they can, like, you know, share and contribute. So I agree with that. So the next part that we're talking about is similar, but a little bit separated, but feel free to chime in points about youth because it's related. So inner resilience support and trainings. So along with engagement opportunities and work, there needs to be room for healing, self-care, and being able to weather the storm. On week 5, Amy actually gave us a really awesome, it might have been week 4, but she just gave us a nice like box breathing technique before our presentation, and it just really put Sabrina and I in a good place for the presentation. And so that made me realize, how often have I been neglecting this, and how often do other people probably neglect, you know, that self-healing, that moment to breathe, that moment to self-reflect. And so we're talking about things like breathing technique workshops, right? And then offering this to core team members as well as HUUF members. And it can be, you know, HUUF youth as well as just HUUF individuals who are doing other organizing work or who may be overworked or stressed in their work life. Then we're also talking about somatic exercises, which is like moving the body and like feeling your hands get squeezed. And I really enjoy these things. So I just want to bring them to light because I feel like they're awesome opportunities. Helping people learn how to breathe and listen to the body, right? So bringing in third-party partners to collaborate. We actually spoke to Aya, whose full name is Ayako. She was here earlier from Transition US, and she actually wants to help engage and develop because she's done this work in the past. I shared I saved the chat, so I have all the resources. So she was just dialing away, like giving us a whole bunch of awesome resources that she's been working on and also just knows of. And so that's another consideration. Like, why not reach out to someone who's done this work and be like, oh, let's make something together and like add it to the curriculum. So that would be the curriculum, right? So like the curriculum is kind of the platform to do this stuff. So all contributions to curriculum can be open sourced, and we can share it with whoever might want to implement it into whatever they're doing, right? And so creating a completely fresh part of the curriculum, I wanted to make sure that you guys know that's an option. You don't have to add on to it or follow a familiar theme and what we already have. Like, absolutely not. Like, you guys have all the autonomy to create whatever you want, and based on the needs that, you know, maybe you're specifically trying to target an audience, right? And that is totally fine. And then there's also developing meaningful engagement courses for youth. So I brought this up again because I feel that that is kind of what we're talking around. We're talking about like course material that can maybe lead to action steps, like having people do some of those projects that we were talking about earlier, and doing so from a place of, oh, we're all like centered, we all have a similar mission, like we feel supported. Why not like have a creative outlet? Like, let's build some garden beds or something like that, because you're in the position to do that at that moment. And then Sabrina, you mentioned International Transformational Resilience Coalition, and you should take a moment to speak on that to really share the broader scope of that.
Sure. This is something that Aya presented to me the other day. It was just which I was hoping that she would be here when this got brought up and she could elaborate on it. But it's something she had mentioned about talking about how she got headway talking about mental health with youth, and she posted in the chat the presentation that she put together, and it was just, it just basically touches on like trauma, how to recognize trauma, how to present yourself, stretching, yoga, meditation, kind of touching on this more inner resilience aspect of like the topic of this presentation, which is building resilience. And because that really is the foundation, right? The foundation of being part of like a bigger movement is developing that inner resilience. And unfortunately, we don't spend the first part of our life learning that, but we're supposed to. That's kind of what being young is supposed to be about. It's about creating that foundation of self so that you can then go out and be a part of the community. And unfortunately, in our society, it's kind of works in the opposite. And now we have so many young people who are traumatized and not really able to even identify that that's what's happening, and definitely not really able to identify ways to address that or cope with that. And so like Amy has expressed, what part of what HUUF can really bring to this movement, this bigger movement of building community resilience, is the aspect of inner resilience. And so I think that bringing that into the young people that you would be planning on working with is a great foundation, because I think it's really important. And so even talking about this collaboration with Cooperation Humboldt and HUUF, one of the components of this transformational resilience coalition is practice purposing as a skill, and purposing being meaning to redirect self and others towards a purpose that engages the source of trauma, the most healing act to stay hopeful. So how do we connect young people to, who are looking for purpose? How do we connect them to stuff that makes them feel purposeful, to community work? How do we, create roles for them that feel meaningful? And that's definitely like, there's not an answer to that right now, but that's something that like we as Cooperation Humboldt, who are very much involved in like, things like building community gardens and, hosting food drives, things that are very concrete, like simple tasks. Connecting youth to maybe those opportunities. And obviously that's just one outlet. They can create their own opportunities. That would be great, but it's always good to, and this is just one angle, the Cooperation Humboldt, like there's so many organizations that you can reach out to and collaborate with and form these relationships and kind of fill those gaps. But yeah, and again, that's just my perspective coming into this. I would love, and I think it's so essential to like bring together a group of youth and have them like really think about these types of things, being facilitated by, someone who has been thinking about that and can kind of like help guide them to the answers that they might be looking for, or the questions that they even need to ask to get to those answers.
Well said, Sabrina.
Yeah.
So we're gonna absorb all that information and just kind of go and do a little visioning session. just kind of how we did for the last one. And this one will be just a tad bit shorter than the previous one. I'm sure there's a lot of overlapping here. So what we did here was we broke it off to internal offerings, collaborations, and curriculum. So internal offerings are things that you want to offer just to like HUUF, like just start maybe. Collaborations is like where you can feel comfortable branching out some branches. Amy has already offered some support for, you know, cooperation, Humboldt core team members, potentially something around those lines. And the curriculum section is things that you want to like develop, right? You want to like take some time to actually structure out a plan, maybe some strategic partnerships. So what are what is everybody's thoughts?
And I was looking at, Amy, you had posted in the Cooperation Humboldt Slack the welcoming like Cooperation Humboldt members to some of your offerings, and I was checking it out, and it seems like you do have some pretty cool things, like the weekly or the every Monday you're having those meetings, and then next Wednesday you're hosting something, and so you clearly already have offerings that are available, but yeah, brainstorming.
Yeah, you know, I feel like we do a pretty good job, you know, COVID or non-COVID, as far as what we offer internally. You know, when we are meeting in person, there's a whole, you know, we have like a human sexuality program that spans, you know, everywhere from the age, I think, kindergarten to older adult, you know, so that's, and that's something that we do a little bit of outreach and offer to the larger community. But for the most, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff on anti-racism work. There's a bunch of stuff on, you know, unlearning your white privilege. There's a whole bunch of stuff on, you know, I'm doing a spiritual practice course here coming up soon. And so I think we do a pretty good job of what we offer internally, so to speak. I just don't know if anybody knows about it beyond our little, our circle, you know? So that's the main thing. It's a very, very well kept secret.
Yeah, I think that's where like collaborations would come into play too, is to, if that's something that are you hoping, is it something that you're wanting to get out into the broader community, hoping to?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I really, so one thing that has been brought up, an idea that I really want to champion at HUUF is, so our congregational administrator, who's been at HUUF longer than I have, she has this, what I think is just a fabulous idea, to, rather than have one committee be tasked as the social justice committee, right? And they're responsible for, you know, heading up most of the social justice work of HUUF. What if it was embedded into every single committee, you know? So the RE committee, right, which deals with children and families, you know, linked up with another community organization to do social justice work as part of their mission. What if the groundskeeping committee, right, you know, linked up with Food for People or whatever, right? You know, so it's, so you build partnership into our structure, rather than have it be something that we're tasking just one small group of people with kind of taking on. So that's an idea that I'd really like to champion. And I think just, you know, when we were looking at the notes and the thoughts about youth engagement, and I just think from my limited finite perspective, it seems to me that UUs have a bit of an outreach aversion. I think a lot of people, many people come to the UU faith from a kind of evangelical background, and are kind of have developed a real allergy, right? Because they've been in an environment that was heavily proselytized, and people telling them, you know, here, you have to join this group and you have to believe this way and pray this way and be this way. And so we want people to feel like they have the full freedom of choice to be who they are. And so we don't really want to feel like we're converting souls, right? But in the process, I feel like we've missed an opportunity to really do just some community outreach, to the point where it's like, hey, we're here, you know, like we are a spiritual community that embodies and strives to live by these values. And if you're seeking a spiritual place to be held and to be completely accepted as you are, like, we have that. So just some community outreach in some form or another is something that I envision and would like to see happen.
Have you had any thoughts around like what that would look like? How that would you go about that community outreach?
I mean, in the very most simple, you know, I'm imagining, you know, just even having a presence at like community events, you know, like a simple table that you can come up to at the farmer's market, right? Or looks like Scarlett has some stuff there too, so I want to stop talking, but yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer for that at the moment.
Okay.
Amy, our brains are like on the same wavelength. I was literally like, Bing, farmer's market table. Like, that's a great way to get exposure because that's
Yeah.
where our community coincides.
I know that as far as a lot of the groups currently or that we had pre-COVID, there seemed to be, you know, certain focuses for different groups and a certain degree of energy amongst the members of those groups for doing what each of those groups were designed to do. And I like the idea of groups coming together more, much more than we came together, much more communication and interaction between them. But I am not sure how much, you know, if we should put it on all groups to do the same thing, and yet to some degree they are. For example, our climate change committee is engaging with the community, and not just with the local community, but, you know, state and etc., you know, to cover issues connected to climate change. And so we are doing a certain amount of that right now. But if we ask,
I'm really
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, and I love that you brought that. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I love that you brought that up, Eve, because I do know, just again, from my limited vantage point, it seems to me that the Climate Action Committee is one of the ones that is continuing to be really active, and maybe
Yes,
thriving is a strong word for this time, and it seems to me that part of that is because they have this active ongoing partnership with 350 Humboldt. So it's not just, you know, one group of HUUF members trying to do this, is they really have formed an alliance with some other community organizations. And it seems like that is really aiding them in their efforts.
right. I guess other committees could, when we're back in action a little bit more, could use doing a little bit more of that. But it may be up to the members of each committee what they feel that they're able to do too. But inspiration, you know, is always good. Suggestions and inspiration, and, you know, talking to one another from what, you know, between one group and the next, you know, is always helpful.
I'm curious if does HUUF have any process kind of like similar to this, where like the whole all the groups get together and engage in like a visioning exercise, and like there's people from every committee there, and so, you know, if anyone has a question about what one group's doing, there's someone there to answer it, and y'all can all kind of like really dive deep together. Is there anything like that?
I think there's something called the Committee of Chairs. Now, Scarlett and Amy would know a little bit more about this, but that doesn't necessarily cover other people. Maybe it does. Other people that want to participate that are in the congregation, it might, and maybe I just don't know that it does. But you know, if you're not a chair of a committee, but you're on the committee, where was I going with that? Yeah, I'm thinking what we did in the past. We did some interesting things in the past that, you know, familiarized our committee more with other committees. And that was, we would occasionally, like maybe once a year or something like that, host a committee fair. And the whole congregation got to come and see what each committee did. The committees got to walk around to one another's little table and familiarize themselves. And, you know, maybe if we ever get back to hosting, you know, social action brunches or something, you know, maybe it would be useful during those times for, you know, folks from different committees to interact a little more. Just a thought. But as far as I know, we only had, in all the years that I was with, that I've been a member of HUUF, I think we only had 2 of those fairs.
Okay. Cause and like in Cooperation Humboldt, we have like regular meetings where, so we have all our program areas, right? And each of those program areas meet weekly, several times a week, depending on what the project is, what the group is. And then there's weekly meetings where like staff gets together every week and talks about what all the groups are doing. And, you know, someone from each one of those groups is there to have discussion and, you know, answer questions, help move brainstorming processes along. And then every month I know that we write up like a report about all the program areas are doing and share that with like the whole core team. So there's just like, my point being that there's just like, we've developed this system of like consistent and very open communication about what's going on, and like a very strong network of like everyone's aware of who's doing what, and if you're not, that information is made to be easily accessible. And I find that like that really helps with the process of like brainstorming project ideas, or like getting connected to a resource or an idea that might help move what you're doing along. And I'm just, yeah, I'm curious like what HUUF, how you operate, or if you operate in any similar type of way, or if you have something that a system that works in that fashion.
Well, we have our congressional meetings like every 3 months or so, every month, I don't know. And then we also have the monthly newsletter that goes out every month that usually has like some important announcements, as well as our weekly that comes out every week with just like little announcements of like whatever's happening that week.
Gotcha.
But none of it is very clear to like what individuals are doing, like, or like
Right.
like what different committees are doing, like
Totally.
it's not like a check-in of like, here's what climate action committee is doing, here's what
Mhm.
RE is doing, like just because
Yeah.
at this time we're not sure what, if those committees are meeting and when they are, like if they're getting something productive done. Amy probably has more to talk about on that.
I know a lot of it has been pared back because of the COVID situation. I know that the chairing committee is still meeting too.
Yeah, because I've heard a few committees brought up during this group, and I was just thinking like how cool to, and like, you know, with questions are like, oh, maybe this committee could do that, and then someone's like, oh, well, we don't want to put that on that committee, or oh, this committee's doing that. And it would be cool if there was like a spokesperson was present from each one of those committees to maybe like speak on behalf of those questions that got brought up. And one thing I want to offer, like from being, now that we're collaborating, is if you ever want to like organize or host some type of like meeting with you know, a representative from each committee, or however that would look, it would be up to y'all, but like we could help facilitate like a more organized visioning discussion where you talk about what you're doing, you talk about where you want to be, and like connect some dots, you know, share some ideas, identify roadblocks, things like that. We would be happy to help like facilitate that, or if that's something you feel like you can do on your own internally, that's cool. But that's just a suggestion of like an offering that we have Cooperation Humboldt. That's something that we like practice often, is like this idea of strategic planning and visioning in a group collaborative way. And so we would be happy to help if that's something you'd be interested or feel like you could benefit from.
Speaking of meetings, I know that we've only scratched the surface here. and I'd love to give more time to these conversations.
Before you go on, I want to hear if anyone has any immediate responses to what I said.
As far as our systems of communication,
that or the offering that I made, if that sounds interesting or something, anything about that.
I super appreciate it, and I'm chewing on it at the moment as far as seeing what we are. I think we at the moment, just given the circumstances and our particular response to the pandemic, which has been, you know, kind of on the upper end of the cautious spectrum, for good reason. I feel like we are not at a place where we're open to a whole bunch of, well, I don't know. It might be something that a small group of people, you know, as we're talking about inner governance and inner policies, you know, because there is a lot of conversation happening around that right now as we're preparing to interview and hopefully hire a new minister. And just the realization is that there is a lot of preparation that needs to happen organizationally, policy wise, hierarchy doesn't, you know, wise, communication wise, before we bring on that person. Because if we bring a new person into the current system, there's going to be, we're kind of setting things up for some difficulty. So I would say let's keep in touch, because I think that down the line that could be hugely beneficial for a small group of people. Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, you don't have to have an answer right now. That's, again, just want to put that out there to, like you said, just think about it and keep in touch. Or like I said, like it could be something you even organize internally amongst yourselves. But we do want to offer that support if it ever feels appropriate. So
Right.
Thank you.
And thanks, Sabrina. Yeah, this is HUUF's direction. This is HUUF's, you know, like we are taking your guys' guidance, and we want to support, you know, furthering conversations such as the ones that we had today, and make sure that we give adequate time and space for that. And so I was hoping that we could land a time to meet, and you know, this is all organizational, this is all planning, this is all visioning, and in time when there is a tangible thing to do, we'll make sure it's COVID safe. We'll make sure it doesn't involve conjugating, and all those details can be addressed. So everything that everyone was surfacing is well noted, well taken, and it's in consideration. So let's lend a time. I saw that this was a time period that works well for Scarlett. I was wondering if everyone else here saw, you know, Tuesdays and Thursdays between 3 and 6 p.m. Is that a decent time frame still for you, Scarlett, one, and for the broader people? Everyone else?
and what are we thinking this meeting topic will specifically be, just so we can have some?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that we can continue some of these conversations, and I'm hoping actually Scarlett or Amy would be willing to create an agenda for us, because again, we're taking your leadership. You guys know where to start, and so this is kind of us switching the script. We've given some guidance, some leadership in this training, right? So we've been able to share some information. So now I feel like it would be appropriate for us to enter your space, and for you guys to, you know, maybe draft an agenda where Sabrina and I can add some items to, or comment to, or whatever. And then we can meet, continue these conversations, see where Cooperation Humboldt can actually act as immediate support, and you know, kind of talk through these things, kind of, you know, being each other's thought partner. Again, we are not trying to like this is not like, I'm not creating the vision for what this group is going to do. I'm hoping that we can create that together. And so let's first just land a time where we can all agree to meet, and yeah, we'll take it from there.
Well, Tuesdays and Thursdays are there. Yeah, those are great on my end. So
Now, is that on Zoom, of course, or in
Yes.
person? Yeah, and Zoom works, yeah.
So Thursdays work best for me. Typically, I have more availability on Thursdays.
So are we looking at the 25th?
Yeah, the 25th. Okay.
For me, the 25th, anytime after 10:30 a.m., between like 10:30 and 3. And then I have a meeting from 3. We have a meeting, Oscar, from
Yeah, I
at
was
4:30.
just noticing that. Yeah, I'm free after 10:30 as well. If we can by any chance do an earlier date,
Yeah, we
Scarlett?
could also do earlier in the day,
Are you talking Tuesday or Thursday?
Thursday.
Thursday the 25th.
Thursday.
Thursday, the 25th, you
Like
said.
noon or 1.
Thursday, the 25th? Yeah, I like noon and 1. Yeah, that sounds good to me.
All right, so we're gonna land lunchtime or right after lunchtime. It's depending on people. Yeah, Sabrina,
I was leaning towards 1.
I'm leaning towards 1 too.
I was feeling the 1 as well. Let's say 1 o'clock. That sounds great.
This is the
Awesome.
1. All right, so
I
Thursday.
have to be somewhere at 4 myself, but that should give plenty of time, shouldn't it?
Definitely.
I
I
mean, if
had a
we,
question just I guess for you, Oscar and Sabrina, just as far as from your vantage point, when you offer this to a community organization, what is your vision of kind of the end result when you go in and you have, all this, there's a lot of stuff on disaster preparedness, there's a lot of stuff on overall resiliency. I guess just how do you end up feeling like we did the thing where we hit the nail on the head, we arrived somewhere in the neighborhood of the goal that we wanted to? What is your ultimate vision for offering this work?
So I would say that the ultimate vision would be to, like, obviously we would like to start moving in the resiliency hub type of like direction, but we want to establish a like strong relationship and like make sure that like the organization's needs and their interests and their immediate like to do items, that those are taken care of before we can get into actually like what turning HUUF into a resilient hub, right? And that makes sense to us right now, especially because of COVID. A physical space is like not something that we like are planning too much around. But I feel like for me, like being able to extend and continue the relationship building is really important. And in time, when the time is right and everything's lined up and we have the support that we need, then we can start doing the like resilient hub, actually like, doing implementation plans and like budgeting and so forth.
Yeah, I feel like to be honest, your organization is kind of the first one that we're really going this intimate with in like this development process. And so I don't think there's really like a necessarily at least this, my ideas or my thoughts would be that there's not really necessarily like an end goal. Like once we do this, we're done. Just kind of like what Oscar said, we're just kind of like developing relationships, seeing how we can support each other, how we can support you. But with you leading the process of like, what are your needs and like, here's what we have to offer, we can kind of help guide conversation and be a part of the process. And we're happy to like think of HUUF like we're a part of HUUF in that way of like, being dedicated to the process. But it's really however your organization wants to unfold, and we're just kind of want to be here to support you. But ideally, like really helping like thinking about this on like a larger scale of many organizations is like we kind of want to like come in, provide education, provide support, and then like release and be like, okay, now like flourish and we'll be here if you need us type thing. Do you know what I mean? Like we've offered you what we have to offer, but we don't want to like by any means like linger or be like constantly like we have to be a part of this process. You know what I mean? Kind of just like offering some education and then tapping out, and an organization can like do what they want with that. And if they want more support, they can come back and we can find a way to offer that. And if they're like, okay, we've had enough of you, bye, like then that's the end of it, So yeah, we're learning too of like what this looks like and what an end goal is. So
Thank you. That's super helpful.
but ideally we want to create like a bunch of relationships where we're just constantly in relationship with one another, and maybe we don't hear from you for like a few years, but you always know we're here, you know, and vice versa.
Well, awesome. I really appreciate you guys as a resource. It definitely helps me feel supported as the youth teen coordinator, just because it feels like, oh, good, I have friends that will help me through this really painful process, that seem to have a little bit more knowledge of what they're doing than me. Um, so, and also just like really looking forward to seeing what we can come up with in the next meeting. In an email that me, Sabrina, and Oscar were throwing around, we were throwing the idea about having a spiritual activism workshop for the teens, and so just seeing what comes out of this collaboration and relationship is really exciting to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Scarlett.
And
Thanks for the
Elizabeth,
sweet
I don't know
words.
if everyone saw Elizabeth posted in the chat a thought about a virtual for now creator coffee house for youth to explore and create social media content on some ideas, and how that could be a form of curriculum. So love that creativity.
Yeah, and Scarlett, just to add to your point, I would love to be part of us doing anything tangible that can then act as like we can be the role models for those younger children, for those younger youth. I would love to be that role model. I would love to be that like that cool group, older group people doing cool things in the community. And so like I feel like I've been looking for a place of faith, and so it's awesome to like have this intimate relationship with you guys, starting from such humble beginnings and such an awesome start to just meet HUUF on an intimate level. So I appreciate the space as much as you guys are, being so appreciative of us being able to create this and offer it to you guys.
Yeah, thank you both so much for holding this space and working through this, and really, really, really appreciate your offering, you guys. Thank you.
Awesome. So we will make sure to send you those vision boards and also some